This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay. Rabbi said there are many well-known questions regarding Chanukah. We know, of course, the question of the Beis Yosef, and this past week we discussed the question of Chaim Brisker. Today we're going to discuss a not so well-known question, and that is the Gemara tells us in Masechta Shabbos, Timu kal hashmanim shebehechal. They defiled all the oil in the Heichal, Gavra Malchus Beis Chashmonai v'nitzcham. And when the Malchus Beis Chashmonai prevailed and defeated them, Badku, they searched, V'lai matzu ela pach echad shel shemen. They only found one jug of oil. The Achronim asked the following question. They went into the Azara. Now the Gemara tells us in Masechta Pesachim that the Azara had a din of Rishus Harabim. Yeah? A public domain. After all, it was open to Kohanim, Levim, Yisrael, anyone could go into the Azara. It was a Rishus Harabim. Now, what's the halacha if you have a case of Safek Tumah Rishus Harabim? If you're unsure if something is Tameh or Tahar, the halacha is Safek Tumah Rishus Hayachid, Tameh. Safek Tumah Rishus Harabim, Tahar. So all the Achronim asked. Now we learn that from Saita. If a woman goes into seclusion with a man in a private place, we don't know what happened. We assume something bad happened. If it was public, we don't assume something bad. Safek Tumah b'shus hayachid, Tameh b'shus ram tar. I don't understand. How do we know the Yevanim defiled all the oil in the Heichal? Well, we have fingerprints on them. No, we're not sure. They were not preserved b'tara. But we don't have, DNA evidence that the Chashmam touched it, that the Yevanim touched it. So if that's the case, we should apply the rule, Safek, Tuma, B'shus Harabim, Tahar. So why did Hashem have to make a miracle? Use the oil. You're telling me, but maybe they were Matame. Safek is Tahar and Rishus Harabim. You got the question? You ever heard this question before?
Why is it Rishus Harabim?
Because the Azara, the Gemara says, has a status of the Rishus Harabim.
How do we know it was in the Azara?
So how do we know it was in the Azara? That's a good question. Who says they kept the oil in the Azara? Maybe they kept it in some private closet. So if you look in the Gemara in Shabbos, on Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis, where this Gemara is mentioned, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara on the side of the page, you have a footnote from Rabbi Akiva Eger. And Rabbi Akiva Eger in the Gilyon Hashas, right? Take a look. While you're learning Shabbos and the Daf Yomi, turn to Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. You'll see Rabbi Akiva Eger in the Gilyon Hashas. He says, "Ayin Barambam Parakei Mehilchos Beis Habachira Halacha Ches." Rabbi Akiva Eger says, "Look in the Rambam Parakei Halacha Ches." So let's look there. So you have on your sheet, look in Aleph on the second paragraph, Nira. This would seem to be what Rabbi Akiva Eger is bothered by in the Gilyon Hashas, al asar on the place. The Rabbi Akiva Eger cites the Rambam. Shakasav, what does the Rambam write? They had 4 chambers on the 4 corners of the Azara. Ma'arav Dromus in the southwest. That's where they kept the wine. Vishemen. That was the chamber of the oil. So what Rabbi Akiva Eger seems to be bothered by is, if they kept the oil in this corner of the Ezras Nashim, that Azara, the Ezras Nashim, had a status of Rishus Harabim. So if they kept the oil in Rishus Harabim, we should say Safek, Tameh, Tahar. Rabbi Akiva Eger then says, Ayin, B'tshuvas, Batei Kahuna, Chelak Aleph, Bebeis Vad, Siman Aleph. That's what Rabbi Akiva Eger says. So we have to look there. Maybe he gives an answer to the question. So there's a gadol by the name of Hagoin, Rabbi Yitzchak Hagoin Rappaport, who's the author of Shalas Teshuvas Batei Kahuna. He adds that, wait a second. The Rabbi Akiva Eger says, look at the Rambam, and the Rambam seems to be saying they kept the oil in the Azara. But the Gemara says, Timu kol hashmanim sheh beheichal. The Heichal is not a Rishus Harabim. Heichal is where only the Kohanim go. That's Rishus Hayachid. But says Rabbi Yitzchak Hakohen Rappaport, it doesn't mean they only defiled the oil in the Heichal. It means even the little bit of oil that was kept in the Heichal, they defiled that too. But certainly they defiled the oil in in the Azara. So the question is, but how do we know it's a Safek Tumah?
Even the Azara, we had a dinner with Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
600,000 people were there all the time.
Yeah, Yisraelim went in there.
Couldn't fit 600,000. It was a nace when they came for the Korban Pesach that there was room for everybody.
But it had the halachic status of Rosh Hashanah. We'll see. In terms of yichud. We'll see. We'll talk about this, okay?
Yichud, I understand, because it's walled up. I mean,
No, it's a Rosh Hashanah for yichud.
Oh, it's Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. So the Batei Kahuna wants to answer like this. The Batei Kahuna wants to answer that yes, when the Rambam says they kept the oil on the Azara, that just means they kept the oil for the menachos in the Azara. Yeah?
That's what we learned, that what they found with the seal of the Kohen Gadol.
Well, that's what some suggest. But he wants to say that the oil for the menorah they did not keep in the Heichal. That they kept. That they didn't keep in the Azar. That they kept in the Heichal. And that's why the Gemara says Timul Kashmanim Sheb Heichal. And that oil, which was stored in Rosh Hayachid, we say Safek Tuma Tame. The only problem is many Rishonim, when they say over this Gemara, for example, Rabbeinu Hananel and the Meiri, their lashon on the Gemara is Timu Kal Hashmanim Sheb Mikdash, which seems to indicate that they were matame everything. Why? Isn't it whatever was kept in the Azara should be Safek Tahar? So Reb Chaim David Shavel, Chaim David Shavel, who wrote the annotated Ramban from Mosad Rav Kook, and he also wrote a sefer called Mishnasa Shel Rabbi Akiva Eger, Begoyan Ashas. He wants to say that when the Gemara says Timu Kol Hashmanim Shebeheichal, it doesn't mean that we're unsure exactly about the status of the oil. Because if it was just Tumah Misafek, it would have said Nitzmeu. It became Tameh. Timu means we know they actively sullied and defiled all the oil in the Eichel. It's not Tumah Misafek. We're dealing with Vadei Tumah here. Okay.
Now you would think the Yavanim doing what they did when they found the condition of the Beis HaMikdash and they put pigs or whatever they did in there, they made a complete job.
Yeah, so you'd say, well, maybe do we know they actively went and defiled every canister? So yeah, the Chaim David Shavel says if it says Timu,
right.
Otherwise it wouldn't say the lashon of Timu, it would say Nidmu. Okay. The Marsham in his time was one of the Paiskei Hadar, Rav Shalom Mordechai HaKohen Mibarjan. He wrote footnotes on the Sefer Orchas Chaim, from the Avdezin of Spinka, and he writes an amazing thing. He says, where do we learn out Safek Tumah B'Shus Harabim Tahar, Safek Tumah B'Shus Hayachet Tameh? What's the source of that? The source of that is the laws of Sota. That if a woman goes into seclusion, into Rishus Hayachid, we have to assume something happened. If she went in Rishus Harabim, we say Tahar. So that means like this. If the law of Safek Tumah Tameh, Safek in Rishus Hayachid, and Safek Tumah Tahar in Rishus Harabim is learned out from Saita, what that means is, whatever constitutes Yichud, Safek Tumah is Tameh. Whatever doesn't constitute Yichud is Tahar.
How is it possible to have...
That's what the Rashba says. One second. Exactly. It's not possible.
It's not possible.
So the Rashba writes in the first parak of Masechta Nida, Rabbi Isai, that this is not just a unilateral rule. Safek Tumah B'Shus Hayachid is Tameh. Safek Tumah B'Shus Harabim is Tahar. No, it's dependent on the laws of Yichud. If you have a case of Yichud in Rishus Harabim, Tameh. If you don't have a case of Yichud in Rishus Hayachid, it's Tahar. You could have Yichud in Rishus Harabim. You're driving down, let's say, a country road when it's night, when it's dark outside and no one's traveling then. It's Yichud. You've got to be careful.
Country road may not have a status of...
Yeah, but if it's, let's say, according to many Rishonim, if it's wide enough, it would be a Shabbos stick of Rishus Harabim, but not for this. So think about it. It says the Marsham. Think about the following. When the Goyim defiled the Beis HaMikdash, there were no Jews inside the Beis HaMikdash. It was full of Goyim. Now, what's the halacha if you have 100 Goyim, 100 male Goyim, and one woman? Yeah, if you have 100 Yiddish men and one woman, it's not Yichud. But if you have 100 Goyish men and one woman, it's Yichud. So says the Marsham, at the time the Goyim went into the Heichal. Yes, technically speaking, Linyan Shabbos, it's a Rosh Hashanah. But at that moment, there would have been an Isser Yichud in the Heichal. Why? There would have been an Isser Yichud in the Azara, because it was full of Goyim. So if at that moment, there would have been an Isser Yichud in the Azara, because it was Malay Goyim, then we would have had to apply the rule, Safek Tuma, Tame, even in Rosh Hashanah. Because it's not Tali in Hilchas Shabbos, it's Tali in Hilchas Yichud. That's what
the halachos of the Azara and the Heichal would apply if it was full of Goyim? I mean, maybe it would kind of lose its status.
No, it would lose its Kedusha, but now we're talking about, well, why would it lose its status of Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah? That's Tali in size.
What do you mean by it's not Tali in Hilchas Shabbos?
In other words, there's a Shabbostic definition of Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. A certain size, if the road is big enough, if the road, right? But the laws of Tumah v'Tahara are not dependent on the laws of Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah for Shabbos. It's totally on the dinim of Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah for Yichud.
So even if it's 100 Goyim,
so if there are 100 Goyim, that's Yichud.
So?
And therefore it has a din of Rosh Hashanah Yachid, and therefore Safek Tumah is Tameh. That's what the Marsham says. I'll give you 2 more answers. Okay, very quickly. There's another famous question regarding Chanukah, and that is, why did Hashem have to make a miracle with the oil? Why couldn't we use tahar oil, tamei oil? You say tamei oil? How could you use tamei oil? We have a rule, tuma, hutra, b'tzibur, that if the majority of Klal Yisrael is tamei, you're allowed to do the avodah b'tuma. And the famous answer of the Chacham Tzin Pnei Yeshua is, you're right, technically, Tumah Sutra B'tzibur, but when we inaugurated the Beis HaMikdash, we wanted to do it in the right way. Hashem wanted to show His chiba to us, that He wanted our perfect avodah. Rabbi say, how do we know Tumah is Safek Tumah B'Shus Harabim Tahar? How do we know that? Safek Tumah B'Shus Harabim Tahar.
We learned it from Yichud.
We learned it from Yichud. That's what the Rashba says. But Tosfos in Masechta Sotah, Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, brings down from the Yerushalmi that it's a Kal V'chomer. You ready for the Kal V'chomer? If Toma is Hutra B'tzibur, that means if Vaday Toma is permitted when you have a Rabbim, then certainly Safek Toma B'Shus HaRabbim is Tahar.
Who says Vadatim is Sifter B'Shus HaRabbim?
No, not B'Shus HaRabbim, B'tzibur. If Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur, then certainly Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim is Tahar.
Why?
That's the Kal V'chomer of the Yerushalmi. So says the Belzer Rabbi. Rabbi Sachadov, Mibels. If the source that Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim Tahar is a Kal V'chomer from Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, but we're not relying on Tumah Hutra B'tzibur by Chanukah. We don't want to rely on it. By Chanukah, we were saying Tumah is not Hutra B'tzibur because we wanted to do it correctly. So for Chanukah, Tumah is not Hutra B'tzibur. You can't make a Kal V'chomer that's Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim is Tahar. Again, what's the source that Safek Tumah is Tahar B'Shus HaRabbim? What's the source Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim Tahar? The Yerushalmi says it's a Kal V'chomer. That if Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur, certainly Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim is Tahar. So says the Belzer Rebbe, if for Chanukah we don't want to rely on the din of Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, so then you don't have a Kal V'chomer for Chanukah that Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim is Tahar. That's in Ois Gimel. You think about that over Chanukah. Yeah? One more teretz. And that is, if we just said earlier that the laws of Safek Tumah B'Shus HaRabbim and Safek Tumah B'Shus HaYachid are dependent on the laws of Yichud, we know that at night time even Rosh Hashanah is Makam Yichud. Now the Yevanim, they definitely were in the Beis HaMikdash at night. So once the night came, everything became tamei. This is what's brought down in the journal Yeshurun, Tafshin Ayin, I believe. Tafshin Samach. Aye! Now we can answer a beautiful kasha. You ready for this question? Oh, the Rambam learns that they didn't, in the Beis HaMikdash, they didn't only light the menorah at night. According to the Rambam Shita, they lit the menorah at night and during the day. So let me ask you a question. According to the Rambam Shita, that they lit the menorah at night and the day, on Chanukah, why don't we light the menorah at night and during the day? After all, aren't we making a zeicha to the Beis HaMikdash, where it lasted 8 days and 8 nights? According to the other Rishonim, they didn't light the menorah during the day. I understand why we don't light the menorah in the day. But according to the Rambam, they lit the menorah night and day, so why don't we do the same thing? Says this journal an amazing answer. Because for the day, we didn't need the Nes of Chanukah. Because for the day, we would apply the rose suffix Tumah B'Shus HaRabim Tahar. So we didn't need to find the oil. No. We only needed the miracle for the nighttime.
For the nighttime, that was
no, but it was
for the day.
But it was only because of the night. The miracle was only needed for the Laila.
What is that day?
Once the night came, then for the day you also needed it.
That day it says Timu. There's no suffix. I mean, you know.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.